Okay, so we're now going to look at residents' concerns, some housing stock information that we've gathered locally, the council's role in this, what we do at the moment, what we'd like to do in future, and some next steps for various parties that we'd like to see happen. Okay, so what are residents saying about their housing conditions? A recent housing needs survey gathered information from around 2,000 residents about their housing conditions. And of those who said that their housing conditions were inadequate, around 30% said that that was due to reasons of costly heating, there being no heating at all, or the property being in disrepair. So that's 30% of those people who actually wouldn't move. They could have an in situ solution if they could find that solution readily available. And that was a research that was done this year by DCA, David Cootie Associates. In terms of what comes into my service, we get lots of requests for investigation of cold homes, but particularly dampness problems, condensation problems typically. And we've seen quite a number of those. There's three sets of figures there. Essentially, around about a third of all our reports to us are of cold or damp homes. And that's a figure that looks like it's on the increase. I mean, 40% last year, and so far this year, without really getting into the winter, we're already up to 34%. So it's quite a resource-intensive thing to look at it retrospectively and try and deal with it. There may be better ways of doing it. So just looking at the energy efficiency profile of the stock here in Chelmsford, this comes from a stock modelling study that was done by the Building Research Establishment. We commissioned that earlier this year, and that's not surveyed information, but it's taken from lots of other sources. So the English House Condition Survey, and then Experian and other data sources, and it's the most reliable way of getting that information without actually going out and knocking on everybody's door and getting into the properties, which is never going to happen. So we're in a really strong position with that information. So this is a sort of a fairly typical picture, I think. It's showing that homes in Chelmsford are predominantly found in the bands D and E, those sort of middle bands of energy efficiency. So ranging from a score of 39 out of 100 through to 68 out of 100. But interestingly, almost 9,000 properties, or 14%, are in those bands F and G that Peter mentioned earlier, the ones that will be illegal to let from 2018. So they're the ones that we'd really like to see improvements in. The average for properties in Chelmsford is 53. That's the average rating. So we're encouraging people to look at achieving that average or above. Basically, below it, and there's greater potential for problems with cold homes and damp and mould as well, condensation problems. Okay, so we've put some information together from that stock modelling survey, and also some information from a charity called the Centre for Sustainable Energy. I think they're actually figures from DEC, the Department of Energy and Climate Change, from a couple of years ago, but we've combined those. That's the figures for solid walls and off-mains gas that they've got available for every local authority area in the country. So if we look at the chart there, basically it's comparing different areas of Chelmsford, starting off with the entire borough. And if we work our way across the top, the second column gives the number of properties in the area, in each area. The third column is regarding cold hazards, so properties that are dangerously cold, unhealthily cold, based on an assessment. And the number and percentage of properties off mains gas in the next column, likewise with solid walls, and then figures for the number of households that are in fuel poverty, and finally an average energy efficiency rating for properties in that area. So the first row we've got is the entire borough. So we've got around 72,000 properties, and around about 7%, just over 5,000, are believed to be in this cold hazard or to exhibit this cold hazard concern, and we'll talk more about that later on. Next column along, off mains gas. About a third of properties in Chelmsford are off mains gas, mostly rural properties. Solid walls, pretty low actually. Chelmsford is fairly new stock by comparison with other towns. I mean, Colchester's a good example. It's got a much higher proportion of solid wall properties, older properties, but nevertheless there are nearly 10,000 of those in the borough. And fuel poverty is a similar figure. We've got around about 13% or 9,500 people who are believed to be in fuel poverty. That's using that old definition, spending 10% or more of their income on fuel. And we mentioned the average energy efficiency rating is around about 53. Now, the rural parish of Chelmsford Rural West is a bit of an anomaly. It's quite a small area in terms of stock number. It's a bigger geographical area. But can you see that figure there? 61% of those properties are believed to have a cold hazard. So there's a major problem there. That's, if we're going to target anywhere, that should be somewhere we'd be interested in looking at. And to correspond with that, we can see there that the entire area is off mains gas. So that's a factor. Mains gas being a relatively cheap fuel. Solid walls, again, they're really quite high compared with the average for Chelmsford. 49% of those properties are solid walled. And the figure for fuel poverty is also significantly higher than the Chelmsford average, 29%. So, nearly a third of people living in that area are deemed to be in fuel poverty. And tellingly, the average energy efficiency rating is really low, 30. That's down in that band F, and it's poor. That's just an average. By comparison, Goat Hall, the city ward, has around about double the amount of properties, and the number of properties, or the proportion showing a cold hazard, just 5%, so below the Chelmsford average. Figures off mains gas, just 10% of those properties there are off mains gas, and 5% have solid walls. So we're starting to see a bit of a correlation between those two factors, being off mains gas and having solid walls, and the number of properties that are exhibiting a cold hazard, and indeed the number of people in fuel poverty, it would seem, because 12% of people in Goat Hall, just below the average for Chelmsford, are believed to be in fuel poverty. And again, the average energy efficiency rating is 52. What we've done at the bottom there, that bottom row, is put together 7 different rural areas, the seven worst, if you like, for some of these figures. And that includes that standout one of Chelmsford Rural West. So 17,000 properties in those 7 rural parishes, and 22% of those, 3,500, exhibit a cold hazard. 51% are off mains gas, 20%, so a slightly increased figure, of solid walls, and 19% the average across those areas for the number of people in fuel poverty. And we've estimated that the average energy efficiency rating there is around about 45. Okay, so that's something that we're quite keen to focus on. What we would also say is that 17,000 is about a quarter of all the properties in Chelmsford, but the proportion of properties that have a cold hazard is 2/3. So 2/3 of all the properties that have this cold hazard in Chelmsford are in those 7 areas. So really clear direction there on where we need to put resources. Looking now at the council's role, I've picked out just 4 areas that I think are relevant to this. We advise and guide on good practice. We regulate housing standards. So if things go wrong, then we're the sort of last sort of line of insurance, I suppose, in terms of dealing with things predominantly in the private rented sector and also social rented sector, but occasionally in the owner-occupied sector as well. We promote and encourage access to energy efficiency improvements, so there are lots of things going on out there, and we're trying to find ways to make sure that people can access those. And finally, this is more of a work in progress, but we're keen to coordinate with health services. So I'll look in a bit more detail at those with you. We've got a lot of information on our website, and there's the address. Looking particularly at things like energy performance certificates and the need for those. So if a property is sold or let, then if that happens since the 1st of October 2008, then there's a requirement for an energy performance certificate. And anyone who's buying or renting a property or about to rent a property is legally entitled to see that in order to inform their decision about whether they want to take that property on. I'm not sure that that's common practice necessarily. I know that a lot of agents will put that information out there, but I don't think people are necessarily looking for it. And I think that's something that we need to push to encourage people to do that. It will make a big difference to their running costs and indeed the affordability of the property that they take on. Peter mentioned F&G rated properties, so those worst ones on the energy efficiency scale, that they're going to be illegal from 2018 as far as renting goes, with some slight exceptions around listed buildings and things like that. But essentially, there's a need to sort that out and to deal with those properties as a priority. And just a bit of information that we put out there, the average energy efficiency rating or SAP rating for the private rented sector is 56, so that's pretty good. That's above the average for the general stock. It's not as good as the social rented sector, but it's pretty good. We're encouraging people to aim for that, landlords, agents, to push for that level or above, because if you do that, then there's a good chance that you'll be avoiding a lot of the problems that we've been talking about today, and there is a clear business case there as well. And we've also just recently added Peter's checklist. He put some information up there, didn't dwell on it too long, but he's given us a lot more information than that, and we've just put that onto the website. And we'd say that's a sort of top tips for landlords document. There's lots of good information in there, so again, we'd encourage you to look at that. And finally, we do inspections. So if people have got concerns, particularly about private rented or social rented property, and they haven't been able to resolve those with their landlord or through third parties, then if they approach us, then we do have an inspection service. We'll go out and assess, we'll guide and give information where appropriate on what's needed to improve the situation. So moving from that to regulating housing standards, I'm keen to stress that this is the sort of last resort, but this is a sort of a quick run through of what happens, what the process is if we need to get involved to regulate. So if we provide lots of information and nothing's happened, we investigate those concerns and we assess under the Housing Act 2004. Essentially, it's a hazard rating system, and there's a lot of guidance on it, and we compare what we're seeing with what that guidance is saying. It's not prescriptive, and there is a judgment around it. That assessment takes place, and we're looking at whether we've got a legal requirement, a legal duty for the council to act, or indeed whether there's a policy requirement, got a local policy, where certain issues are also flagged up. And a good example is where we've got a legal duty to act, Category 1 hazard for excess cold. So a lot of the times people are coming to us with damp and mould concerns. An awful lot of those will not have an underlying Category 1 hazard for excess cold, but quite a few do, particularly in the private rented sector, where we're finding that properties aren't necessarily that well insulated, or indeed they've got poor heating systems, typically electric heating, very expensive, maybe not even space heating, not night storage heating, and that's a major problem, that combination, and often we're finding that there's an underlying hazard. Very small minority, I have to say. It's not widespread across the stock, because we've seen that from that average rating, but there are a notable number that are coming to us where we're saying, yes, we've got a duty to act, and then we're engaging in dialogue with the landlord and agent. So at that stage, we're looking to consult with the owner and or manager and look to try and secure some commitments to resolve it. We're under a duty, so we've got to do something, but we don't want to disempower the people who are in control of it. We want people to take that on, take that information on board, and come up with proposals on how they're going to solve it. Assuming those proposals are satisfactory in terms of time and content, then we'd look to just monitor progress and really see that through. Only where that's unsatisfactory would we have any concerns that would lead to having to reassess and then look at serving legal notices, which also carry a penalty charge. So we're getting into the realms of, we've had to do more work on it and we need to cover our costs, and it's a bit of a penalty for the person who's responsible for that property. Beyond that, if those notices aren't complied with, then we've got two options, and they're not mutually exclusive. We do both. So we could get involved with doing works to a property in extreme cases where the owner hasn't taken that responsibility, and we can also prosecute for failure to comply with the notice. So they're quite they're quite serious issues further down the line. It's very resource intensive for us. That's not really what we want to do, but we will do it in the minority of cases where we have to, because there isn't that self-regulation going on. And I think that's probably a reassurance to most operators in the marketplace who are providing a good service, and they want to see that. We're hearing a lot from landlords associations at the moment about targeted regulation and actually local councils taking those responsibilities seriously. The next area is to promote access to energy efficiency improvements. So we do look to negotiate favourable schemes, and you may have heard of the Herts and Essex Energy Partnership, which ran for a few years recently. In fact, Climate Energy Peters Company were the managing agents for that, and it delivered over £500,000 worth of insulation improvements and some heating improvements to several hundred properties. I think it was just over 1,000 properties in Chelmsford. There was the best take-up out of any of the 15 authorities in Herts and Essex who were involved. So that was great. The publicity worked, and we got decent numbers of people coming forward to get good value insulation done. There is a current move to try to get some of this eco money, so energy company obligation that is in the news and Peter's mentioned already, into Chelmsford. And we're looking to do that through a cross-county, a pan-county scheme that hopefully will deliver it. If it doesn't, and that's taking its time, I have to say I'm a bit frustrated with it. If that doesn't come off, then we'll look to do something locally. But the key thing is that we've got great stock information here, and we also have information about the people who are most eligible for eco funding. So what's called the affordable warmth group, people who are in receipt of certain benefits, and we've got that information. We can actually write to those people, and that's a situation. Not many councils are in that situation, so I think we're in quite a favourable position to try and draw that funding into this area. And that's really the point about helping to advertise, lending our brand, the council's name, to schemes that are, have been vetted for due diligence and so on, and are going to be effective. We put our name to those and target people who are most in need. So we've got that information about those 7 areas. We've got information right down to property level. It's modelled, so it's not 100% accurate, but it's a way of actually getting that message out there. So we're keen to do that. We have got an existing scheme which is managed by Aaron Insulation, who are out the front, and they have been looking to insulate hard-to-treat properties, so particularly three-storey blocks of flats that are privately owned. I mentioned it in the introduction. They are notoriously difficult because you've got lots of different owners involved. You've got a freeholder, perhaps a freehold manager, you've got leaseholders, and you've got private tenants as well. They're sublet to private tenants. So to try and coordinate that and manage it is difficult. And there have been a few teething problems, but I'm pleased to hear that Aaron have managed to make some progress with it, and a number of flats that were very prone, we got a lot of complaints from, prone to condensation and mould in Springfield, North Springfield in particular. They're starting now to be insulated, and I think that will make a big difference to residents there, and we expect to see complaints go down in relation to those on that basis. So that's great news, and that's continuing, and we're looking to roll that out across the borough to other blocks of flats. So if you're involved in any of those properties, whether as a landlord or involved with freehold management, then please do speak to Aaron. Okay, and as I said, coordinating activity with health services is an area that we're looking to develop. This event is about that. It's about starting to talk to health and starting to talk to people who are out there in community health work. And what we're keen to do, looking at these areas, there's a potential to launch a public health campaign and actually highlight some of the issues we talked to you about today, particularly with what's in the national press at the moment. We're looking at different referral systems. We'd like to have a system whereby we can refer into health, and likewise health visitors, be it mental health workers, be it community midwives, and so on. If they can actually have a system to refer to us when they're picking up problems with properties, that they're relating to the health conditions that people are presenting with, then that would be excellent. And so we're looking at that at the moment as well. And we'd like to look at all of the funding that's available and say, can we target that funding better? Can we get more preventative so that we're saving costs at the tail end of things when people get ill? that's ideally where we can go. And I think the better the information that we get on this, the more potential we've got to do it. And finally, we're particularly keen to direct the right advice to families experiencing condensation, dampness and mould growth. At the moment, as I said in the introduction, we're concerned that actually health workers may be being coerced into encouraging people to move, or to agree with them. Yes, that's terrible, you need to move. Well, no, that's not necessarily the case. And I think giving people false hope on that and increasing the sort of strain on new build and social housing is not the answer. There's already so much demand there, so that needs to be reduced, and we need to find ways of making existing properties suitable and up to scratch. So we've got a few next steps for different groups that we've picked out. So for health professionals, what we're asking you to do is to review your role in influencing solutions. You know, you're well respected, and there's a lot of information there that you can provide, but sometimes I think things are said that don't necessarily help the situation. So in particular, we're looking at encouraging your patients to seek advice and keep an open mind regarding dampness diagnosis and solutions. If people get closed off to it, then actually bringing about a solution is very, very difficult, so that's important. And in particular, not mismanaging patients' expectations. So this thing around, you know, is it viable to move, or actually, you know, is a solution in situ more suitable and more tangible, actually. And we're finally asking, you know, would you support a public health campaign? Would you get involved in that and look at a system for referrals? We're very keen to look at those two things. For us, there are a number of things that we need to do. We need to finalise this eco-funded scheme across Essex, so the energy company obligation. We need to get that money coming into the area. You can see those figures. They're not out of step with national figures, and certainly some other areas have got much worse housing conditions than we have here. However, we have got a genuine problem. You saw that from those figures on fuel poverty, so we need to get that money in. We're looking to work with partners, whether they be in the health service, whether they be voluntary sector, or indeed the property sector as a whole, in order to target that funding to eligible properties. So if you've got information or you've got certain ideas on how that can be done, we're keen to hear them. And we're also very keen to contribute to that public health campaign that increases community awareness of these issues. There's a big opportunity there right now with what's going on nationally, and we'd like to go off the back of that to start addressing some of these problems. For landlords and agents, we're suggesting a number of things. We're very keen that you review your properties in light of what you've heard today. So what are their energy efficiency ratings on the energy performance certificates? What improvements are identified there? And is affordable warmth really achievable? Are those running costs as low as they could be, or are they still high? And is that affecting the way people use your property? Are you getting long void periods? Probably not in the current market, because there's a lot of people who will come in. But I don't see the churn necessarily as a good thing in terms of turnover of tenants. I think, you know, if there's a potential for people to be more stable and more settled in the property, then that's good news for your business too. And that's really the next point, is about evaluating that business case for investment. There's a number of points there, and we think it does stack up. Part of the problem is the lack of awareness isn't there out in the community at large, but once people start cottoning on to these energy price rises, and the fact that their choice of property in the private rented sector, for example, will dictate whether they can actually afford it or not, or rather the fuel costs will dictate that affordability, then that will really start to affect the private rented sector. And finally, there's Peter's checklist that I've mentioned. We've put that on the website. There are some really good tips in there, so we'd be very, very keen to advocate that you explore that.